By the summer of 1985, Police Academy was pretty much on top of the world. The first film had proved a low-budget smash-hit success story with audiences in the spring of 1984, and 1 year later, it became a franchise player when the second film repeated the trick, making Police Academy one of the most profitable brands in Hollywood.
I'm impressed!
As we've explored in part 1 of No Laughing Matter. Despite initially being seen as a no-hoper within the industry and dismissed as puerile nonsense by critics, Police Academy was now a force to be reckoned with in the entertainment business.
Big time.
And Warner Brothers wanted the prequel of the series in double quick time. It had to be ready to make it to cinemas in March of 1986 for the franchise's now third annual spring opening weekend. Even after years of a solid back-to-back cycle of production and promotion though, Police Academy 3 back in training would prove to be nowhere near the end of the production line. The brand continued to deliver a constant stream of sequels, along with expanded horizons in new platforms as it aimed to become an entertainment powerhouse. TV shows, comic books, cracking the music charts, you name the pie, Police Academy dipped at least one finger in it. And that's not even counting the rest of the industry's attempts to ride their coattails with a dizzying array of Police Academy imitators and knockoffs, as Hollywood embraced the concept of too much never being enough.
I'm the captain. Meet the last precinct team following the game.
Combat Academy, the comedy that's uniformly funny.
Vice Academy Part 2, coming in October.
But the thing is, just like the 1980s era of excess it inhabited, the good times couldn't last forever. A crash was coming, and Police Academy's time at the top of the Hollywood mountain would prove short-lived. By the end of the decade, Police Academy had gone from a profit-making machine to a train-wreck punchline delivering increasingly diminishing returns. How exactly did the franchise go from the penthouse to the outhouse? Was a collapse inevitable, or could Police Academy have somehow avoided jumping the shark? Were the critics and naysayers right about the later films in the series? And was there any hope for the brand by the time the 1990s rolled into view? Well, jump on board as we set sail to continue our deep dive journey with the second wave of Police Academy. It's time to explore the late 1980s.
Very funny, Jones.
But first, let's set the scene of the early days of 1986. As the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame welcomed its first ever class of inductees, Cheers and the Show ruled transatlantic TV viewing, and Whitney Houston and the Pet Shop Boys topped the charts on both sides of the Atlantic. In Hollywood, the John Hughes written classic Pretty in Pink continued the glory days of teen movies, and Out of Africa swept the board at the Oscars, going on to make more than $225 million at the worldwide box office. Back to the Future had continued the mid-80s trend of timeless classic original films, and Hollywood studios continued to lean heavily into sequels and hit single-led soundtracks as key elements of their business plans. Compared to the iconic and successful output of 1984, however, 1985 had not been a great year for Hollywood's bottom line overall. Though the year still featured some successes and some future classics, ticket sales were down almost 20% year on year, with a number of films underperforming at the box office. One such example of this was Disney's Wizard of Oz sequel, Return to Oz, a film which Paul Maslansky produced in between his work on parts 1 and 2 of Police Academy. Different from those films in almost every way, this was an incredibly brave and dark follow-up to a true Hollywood classic. It's a piece of work which Maslansky is still rightly proud of, and one that I think stands up well to this day. The audience of June 1985, however, was simply not ready to accept it at the time, and the summer release date contributed to the film making less than half of its production budget back in cinemas. Despite internal Oscar hopes for Return to Oz, the film received only one nomination for special effects, and Maslansky would soon return to the series which had made him a millionaire and had become an industry of its own.
What they don't know can't stop them.
Strangely conspicuous by its absence from the Oscar nominations in early 1986 was the second film from that franchise, Police Academy 2, their first assignment.
And the winner is...
Police Academy 2, their first assignment.
Even without the awards though, The sequel had become one of 1985's success stories, being the 8th highest grossing film in North America that year, and the 11th most profitable at the worldwide box office. It also outperformed other comedies of 1985, like National Lampoon's European Vacation and Brewster's Millions, as well as achieving a higher gross than The Breakfast Club, a John Hughes masterpiece which I think we can all agree is one of the greatest films ever made.
That is true.
Even though it would be difficult to argue the case for Police Academy 1 and 2 being quite at that level, with many critics happy to state that they weren't even close to being good. They sold tickets like gangbusters and became beloved by an audience far larger than most experts thought they had any chance of finding. With the Ladd Company, the original production house of the first 2 films in the series, no longer a going concern, Warner Bros. Now had total control of the franchise's future, and Police Academy was a reliable tentpole in their annual release schedule. Police Academy 3, back in training, was ready to join the party. Even if for some reason the Oscars was still ignoring it, Police Academy clearly had staying power and remained hot property. The key now, in the face of ever-increasing demands from the studio, was decoding how to maintain this momentum. Police Academy 3 Back in Training opened on March 21st, 1986, precisely 1 year after Police Academy 2 had hit cinemas, which itself arrived 12 months on from the debut of the original Police Academy film. Nothing if not efficient.
My motto is simple. Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency.
It was written by Gene Quintano, who was also commissioned to deliver the script for Police Academy 4. Probably sensible, given that the 4th installment was already earmarked by Warner Bros. To start production just a few months later. Quintano later wrote and directed Loaded Weapon 1 and also delivered the script for Operation Dumbo Drop. What a resume. Police Academy 2 director Jerry Paris returned for the 3rd installment, as did most of the cast, with lead Steve Guttenberg now a legitimate Hollywood star, thanks to his roles in Cocoon and the upcoming Short Circuit. Leslie Easterbrook's Callahan was also back on the Police Academy beat after missing Part 2. For those of us in the die-hard Captain Harris fan club, the sad news that G.W. Bailey is again absent from Police Academy 3 came as quite a blow. But the good news is that Harris does thankfully return later on in the series. But for the 2nd film in a row, he is very much missed here. Filming had returned to Toronto in September of 1985, following the move to LA for Part 2, and the by now well-oiled production line kicked into gear once more. The story revolved around the original graduate class of Commandant Lassad's Police Academy going full circle and returning to the academy to train new recruits, who included Bobcat Goldthwait Zed and Tim Kazurinsky's Sweet Chuck, 2 positive additions from the previous film. Mahoney and Company are brought back as budget cuts mean that only one of the city's 2 academies, the other now apparently run by Art Matrano's Mauser, can remain open. So the original recruits aren't actually back in training themselves, they're the ones doing the training, if you see what I mean.
When we're finished with you, you'll have nerves of steel, ice in your veins, and a set of brass balls this big.
But either way, Mauser is prepared to use any tactic he can to ensure Lassad's original academy is the one to get the chop. High stakes, cliffhangers, drama. Police Academy 3 clearly had the lot, in spades. Police Academy 3 also delivered 2 elements which the series would continue to hold on to religiously going forward. The first was that it featured a large, over-the-top, action movie-style crescendo set-piece ending, which would become a trope of the franchise from here on in. The other was the move to a PG classification. Police Academy had received an R rating in the States, meaning that under 17s had to be accompanied by an adult to see it, and Police Academy 2 a PG-13, at which point they could get away with a little bit less. From Police Academy 3, the series was striving for a PG classification as standard going forward. Only some material was considered unsuitable for young children. Given the ever-growing success the series was achieving in international markets, where more cartoonish action would transcend any language barriers, this was perhaps an understandable move in some ways. Whether it was the best idea for the quality of the output in the long term, however, would remain to be seen. Inside the Police Academy bubble, there were clear signs that all was not well. Howard Hesseman, the second Lassard brother from Part 2, refused to return even though he was offered a contract, later stating that he even regretted taking the original job. No major loss, but still a bit of a stinging evaluation. And another sign of issues behind the scenes. Bobcat Goldthwait was openly dismissive of the series in public and on set, admitting he took the handsome pay packets offered to fund his kids' education. Even Steve Guttenberg, Mr. Police Academy, was feeling the strain. There was truth in what Bobcat was saying. I felt it too. It was just showing up mainly. The movie just needed to get completed. The audience already wanted more. You could sail on just the uniform and a smile. That momentum carried over to the material. Critics massacred Police Academy 3, as was now expected.
I suppose that the Police Academy movies are trying to do something sort of innocent and harmless in their own way, at a time when so many movies are filled with high-tech violence and soul-searching despair and the sex lives of obnoxious adolescents. Here's a movie that only wants to be good, dumb fun. It comes out of the tradition of Abbott and Costello and the Three Stooges. The trouble is, those old comedies had a certain crazy energy level, a certain method to their madness. And they had characters who got developed to the point where you could care what happened to them. Police Academy 3, like parts 1 and 2, never cranks up the energy to make it funny enough.
For most of the first part of No Laughing Matter, I defended the first two films against the fierce critical derision. And I'm an admitted Police Academy apologist. But by the arrival of Back in Training, things were starting to get onto shakier ground for sure. While Police Academy still legitimately holds up as a solid comedy of its era, and Police Academy 2 is enjoyable enough in its own way, Police Academy 3 Back in Training feels like the start of the downfall of the Empire. It's not a total disaster, and equally it's not to say that there are no redeeming features here. Returning to the Academy grounds the film, and there is an endearing quality to seeing the characters together in their original environment. Zed and Sweet Chuck's relationship gives the franchise's future some hope, even if behind the scenes Bobcat Goldthwait was openly admitting to staying in the Police Academy universe for the money. They are undoubtedly great value together though, it has to be said. The great George Gaines Lassard gets to do more here than he did in part 2, which is a bonus. The climax of the film, the denouement chase scene involving boats and jet skis, is actually pretty well done, but it still feels like there is a lapse in standards here, and the signs of erosion are more obviously on display. The series seems to be visibly running out of ideas. The main characters aren't given too much of interest to do, and their individual story arcs aren't really developed. The on-screen chemistry between Steve Guttenberg and Shawn Weatherly, the former Miss Universe who arrived as his latest love interest, can't hold a candle to the Kim Cattrall romance from part 1. Police Academy was never close to being highbrow, or hyper-realistic, but from here on out the films had carte blanche to feature some grade A all-ages nonsense. New characters at best offer very little abuse or drive to the whole thing, and at worst demonstrate the depths of base-level stereotypes and humour.
No offense, eh? Arigato. Thank you. Kiss my what?
Of course, this kind of thing isn't uncommon for 80s cinema, but the original Police Academy film tackled issues within society more maturely than it's given credit for. It actually had a message. I know that sounds mad given the reputation the series now carries, but watch it back again and come back to me. It genuinely fought against racial stereotyping, whilst part 3 leans to it as a comedic tool. I'm probably looking into this all far too deeply for my own good, but Police Academy 3's lurch towards family-friendly viewing also has an impact. This being a PG film in itself wasn't an issue, of course. Many of the greatest films ever made are family-friendly. For Police Academy, though, it was an excuse to get lazier. The initial success of the first film was built around the juxtaposition between the more filthy fare and the lighter slapstick antics. Leaning too heavily towards the latter, in a franchise already becoming something of a comedy film factory, was almost an invitation to deliver a poorer end product. To some extent, the reasons for this are understandable. Police Academy have been churning content out at a rate of knots for years now, with essentially no break between the cycle of writing, production and promotion. Burnout was almost inevitable. Maybe taking some time to craft things a tad more would have helped. A year without a Police Academy film. But then again, it's understandable that there was an ambition to make hay while the sun was still shining. Whether the cracks were visible on screen or not was a secondary concern to executives though, as, at first glance on raw numbers alone, this was still a very profitable brand. Police Academy 3 spent 3 weeks at the top of the US box office, with opening weekend figures outstripping the original film, and only around 15% down on part 2. It ended up as the 17th highest grossing film of 1986.
Still got it.
When you interrogated the data a little more, however, the argument that things were running out of steam gained even more credence.
Numbers, unlike children, don't lie.
Takings for Police Academy 3 dropped off faster than the sequel it followed, and demonstrated none of the staying power of the remarkable run of the original film. International box office numbers were objectively impressive, sure, and they were in excess of the North American performance for the second film in a row. But by 1986, the decade had seen such a glut of a similar type of comedy films that it was starting to feel like overkill. Police Academy was still riding the wave for now, though, and continuing to strike gold given the comparatively meagre production costs. As the video store industry began to explode in popularity, so did a massive new revenue stream for the franchise. Police Academy 3 made over $21 million from North American VHS rentals alone. Even if the quality seemed to be dropping, the bottom line was still rocking. It was a series sustaining itself on brand recognition. As Steve Guttenberg remembers, things definitely felt different for the third go-around. I had the feeling that we were dipping into the world too much. The studio saw it as a cash cow, and it was, but we still needed to give it the quality care it needed. Paul Maslansky tried to keep a hold of the film, but it had a life of its own. Let's talk about the late 80s craze of Police Academy imitators for a little bit, shall we?
Shall we?
We shall.
Film industry trends turn more at the speed of oil tankers than Formula One cars, and the success of Police Academy in the mid-1980s did not go unnoticed. The rich and varied history of Police Academy knockoffs is enough for a deep dive video in itself, and became its own cottage industry running parallel with the increasing overindulgence of the main franchise. Not only had it managed to create its own enterprise, but Police Academy had also instigated an entire wave of imitators, which kept a sea of people gainfully employed for the rest of the decade. As the 1980s rumbled on, we saw the army-based hijinks of Combat Academy, Doctor Academy in the form of Stitches, moving violations, which could have been called Traffic School Academy, another military service academy comedy called Weekend Warriors, also known as Hollywood Air Force, Hamburger University Academy and the Frankly Bonkers, Hamburger, the motion picture, and the likes of Recruits and The Last Precinct, the latter starring the former Batman Adam West, which didn't even bother with the pretense that they were anything else but a wannabe police academy. Vice Academy, another direct attempt to imitate the franchise, but with more of a porn star edge, debuted in 1989 and went on to have 5 sequels.
I know a genuine Panaphonics when I see it.
Some made it to cinemas, a few were made outside of Hollywood, and most were produced for the burgeoning VHS market or were cheap made-for-TV knockoffs. Even though Police Academy's own quality control would end up hurting its legacy in the long run, and none of the wannabes came close to its financial triumphs, the market being flooded certainly succeeded in doing the audience's excitement for endless comedies of the same ilk, even if they came from under the Police Academy umbrella, no good at all. Combat Academy was a made-for-TV movie whose cast included George Clooney in just his second film role, and Moving Violations was actually a pretty decent cinema release, with Bill Murray's brother John in the Steve Guttenberg role. It did not manage to duplicate Police Academy's box office success, but it holds up pretty well today. These two films being so clearly influenced by Police Academy was perhaps unsurprising, as they were both directed by Neil Israel, who, along with Pat Proft, was the writer of the original Police Academy script. By this point, Israel and Proft were suing Warner Bros. In relation to the franchise. They were demanding a larger share of Police Academy's net profits, along with damages totaling $1.5 million. Though it's unclear how this suit was eventually settled, and in all likelihood it was settled out of court, it ably demonstrated the value of the Police Academy brand, at least in the early days. Police Academy's driving force producer Paul Maslansky was even attempting to rip off his own franchise by the early 1990s.
From the makers of Police Academy comes Ski Patrol.
But we'll get to that in part 3. Putting the rip-offs aside for a moment, Police Academy 4 had already been greenlit in time for the 4th consecutive spring cinema release date in 1987. As the franchise moved towards its 4th year in existence, the Police Academy floodgates were well and truly open. Not sure if this really counts as a spoiler, but
Spoiler!
Lassard's Academy won the day at the climax of the third film. And that brings us to
Police Academy.
Police Academy 4 Citizens on Patrol was released on April 3rd, 1987. Sadly, the fourth film in the series would need a new director after Jerry Paris had passed away just 10 days removed from the release date of Part 3. Jim Drake, another director who had learned their trade making TV shows, in Drake's case on episodes of the likes of The Golden Girls, Who's the Boss, and a dodgy sounding TV movie called This Wife for Hire, was his replacement. Drake later went on to direct the Cannonball Run ripoff Cannonball Fever, and made-for-TV films such as Goddess of Love, based on an untrue story, and a human pet reincarnation comedy called Dad's a Dog. Not exactly a resume which fills you with confidence for Police Academy 4. Steve Guttenberg remembers his heart sinking somewhat at the thought of another one. It had to happen. Police Academy 4. The vulgarity of it all. We didn't know when, but it was coming. We would joke about it, like an impending doom. The call for the third worried me, but the call for the fourth, all that greed and the feeling of duping the audience, they were so rabid for more, especially the international guys. As his agent noted to him at the time, in show business, sometimes it's the show, and sometimes it's the business.
That's business.
And making Police Academy 4 was, in large part, one case where it was far more business than show. Citizens on Patrol added a whole wave of even more new characters to the mix, with a storyline aping the original film, as the graduates are sent in to train a group of civilians to increase the ranks of the force through a program created by Commandant Lassard known as COP, Citizens on Patrol. G.W. Bailey's Captain Harris is back as he makes a welcome return to the franchise. Harris takes on the role of Nemesis in Chief, aiming to ruin the COP program, with Lassard just randomly disappearing for part of the film to attend a conference. In the end, officers and cadets combine to foil a jailbreak, despite the tomfoolery of Harris and his number 2 Proctor, and the pretty impressive hot air balloon plane chase scene brings proceedings to an end with the second set-piece climax in a row. It's completely random, but it's certainly not boring. Watching Police Academy 4 back so many years on, I really wanted to enjoy this one. There are at least some attempts to move the franchise forward, and it does have a retro charm, even if it's in the cheesiest 80s way possible, which admittedly is not really a bad thing, and it's an improvement on Police Academy 3 for sure. So there's that. Let's be honest though, Police Academy 4 Citizens on Patrol is still a hot mess.
You're a hot mess! You're a hot mess!
The family-friendly PG comedy style is even more prevalent than it has been before here. The conflict between that and the more bawdy R-rated elements, the thing that helped make the original film a success, is almost completely gone. The new characters do have their motivations explained, certainly more than Police Academy 3, and plot lines such as the romance between Zed and Laura are handled with a genuine sweetness. Speaking of sweet, Zed's love-hate relationship with Sweet Chuck, both of whom are out of the franchise after this one, is another positive. The reality is though, that a lot of the humour is both very base level and extremely lazy. I'm not sure what I was expecting from Police Academy at this stage, but it was definitely more than the majority of what was on offer here. Characters who once had charm were now becoming increasingly annoying, and the inbuilt audience was being treated to a product which had been made at speed and without too much consideration.
Get it done.
Citizens on Patrol felt like the end of an era, with this being the last film in the franchise for a number of regular characters, including one very major one, and from a purely creative perspective, probably should have been the final chapter of the series overall. There was no way the money train would stop rolling given the profits already made though, and the diversification plans the bigwigs had for Police Academy going forward. Even if Citizens on Patrol underperformed, Part 5 was already coming down the pipeline. The civilian intake for Part 4 includes a very young David Spade, who plays an unconvincing skate punk in a role which also briefly allows Tony Hawk to appear as his stunt double. Being a long-standing skate geek, the fact that the stunt doubles also include Steve Caballero and other members of the Bones Brigade is a highlight to this very day. In addition, Citizens on Patrol also features a pre-Basic Instinct Sharon Stone, who turns up for one film as Mahoney's love interest. Stone's character is completely irrelevant to the plot, apart from the fact that she can randomly fly a plane, as is conveniently revealed in the climax. Also, for some reason, the way George Gaines says citizens on patrol has always been really satisfying. So there's that.
I want to welcome all of you to
Citizens on Patrol.
Citizens on Patrol.
Can you tell by this stage of the franchise that I'm clutching at straws a little? In the 1980s, Hollywood went all in on the soundtrack. Sure, there have been hit singles from films in the charts on both sides of the Atlantic before this, and the likes of the Bond franchise have been doing it for decades already. But this was the era in which top 40 songs and albums became a seemingly mandatory element of the major studio movie package. Extended montages and credits backed by a potential smash hit became the norm for the bigger pictures of the era, with the MTV and music video aesthetic increasingly permeating cinema as well. This was a symbiotic relationship that extends to this very day. Almost as a sidebar to this, the trend of the movie or TV star attempting to cross over to the pop world became another prevalent cultural phenomenon in the 1980s, with some displaying little aptitude for their new second job. From Eddie Murphy to Bruce Willis to Don Johnson to the guy who was his mate Tubbs in Miami Vice to Max Headroom, they were all at it. Clearly, the Hollywood machine has learned to do this far more efficiently over the decades, but as of 1987, the movie star pop star hybrid was often hit and miss. Given that this was the style at the time, Police Academy would of course attempt to jump on board and join the party. Citizens on Patrol became the first film from the franchise to receive a fully fledged soundtrack album released on Motown Records. Largely featuring a selection of 80s artists you're unlikely to either remember or have heard of. It also included Beach Boy Brian Wilson's song Let's Go to Heaven in My Car. This became the one and only Razzie Awards nomination the Police Academy franchise ever received, losing out for Worst Original Song to I Want Your Sex by George Michael, which featured in Beverly Hills Cop 2, and a song that remains a far more regular presence on classic radio stations to this day than Let's Go to Heaven in My Car has ever been. The Police Academy 4 soundtrack also found space for an attempt to cement Michael Winslow as a pop star. Citizens on Patrol was in fact Winslow's second crack at breaking through in music. Island Records had dropped his first single, I Am My Own Walkman, in 1985 to little fanfare. It did apparently make it to number 60 in Australia, and 40 years on, the song is still a bit of a low-key banger. But when the track failed to land, this seemed pretty much it for the man of 10,000 sound effects. By 1987, however, Winslow brought his fledgling pop star dreams to Police Academy 4's main single, the Citizens on Patrol title track. He teamed up with the LA Dream Team, a West Coast hip-hop group who went by the incredible names of Snake Puppy and Rudy Party. And Citizens on Patrol, the single, was released on MCA Records in line with the film in April 1987.
Citizens on Patrol!
Again, the song isn't too bad, in a very dated way, but it's not a huge surprise that this was the first and last attempt at Police Academy crossing over into the Billboard Hot 100. Though it was definitely released as a single in 1987, and there are plenty of actual vinyl copies available to buy online, I can find no record of it making a single chart appearance anywhere, not even in Australia, and Michael Winslow's music career fizzled out with it. The song being used in the opening credits of Citizens on Patrol did, however, inspire Steve Guttenberg to deliver some of the cringiest hip-hop posturing in the history of humanity, so that's something. Anyway. Steve Guttenberg was the most high-profile departure following the release of Police Academy 4, with his involvement with the franchise ending here. His character Mahoney was being written pretty badly by Part 4 anyway, but Guttenberg's exit stage left was still a significant moment for the series. I stepped into a police uniform one too many times, but the money was sizable and I took it. The day we wrapped, I knew that it would be the last. Guttenberg would become an even bigger star later that year when 3 Men and a Baby, which he headlined along with Tom Selleck and Ted Danson, became a genuine crossover smash to the tune of more than $240 million worldwide from its cinema run alone.
Point Guttenberg.
Really though, with the films he'd already been starting to make by this point, it's a wonder Steve Guttenberg didn't depart the Police Academy universe sooner. But the money was still very good, for minimal effort, and he generally enjoyed his time on the set. On the subject of money, Citizens on Patrol made it the 4th year in a row that a Police Academy film had opened at number 1 at the domestic box office. Although it was also the lowest opening of the franchise so far, and interest dwindled more rapidly than it had previously. Whereas parts 1 to 3 had hung around in the top 10 list for a few months at least, by the end of April, Citizens on Patrol dropped out of the highest earners rapidly, lasting just 4 weeks. The film eventually grossed over $76 million in cinemas worldwide, roughly half of the original, with over 60% of that total coming from the international market. Clearly, the PG style was becoming the norm for a reason. The future of the Police Academy industry it had created for itself was more reliant than ever on the non-English speaking world. Though interest across the wider world was now directly inverse to the dwindling Police Academy curiosity in North America, the fact that the franchise had grossed almost $500 million after 4 films from cinema takings alone, or, adjusted for inflation, more than $1.2 billion in today's money, meant that, for now at least, there would be no end to this runaway train, with or without Steve Guttenberg.
This is the news at 1.
By September 1987, Police Academy 5 Assignment Miami Beach was already being made. And oh boy, were Paul Maslansky and his team cooking up something on the Florida coastline. But we'll get to that in due course, as Warner Brothers had its finger in more than one pie now. Before long, a further reason for the lurch towards PG fare became obvious when it was confirmed that Police Academy would dip its toe into a brand new medium, the world of children's television. With Warner Brothers having re-established their animation studio at the start of the 1980s, mainly to create new Looney Tunes work, by the second half of the decade, they were on the lookout for opportunities to develop more in the burgeoning space of animated TV series. Given the cartoonish world it inhabited, Police Academy soon became a prime candidate for brand diversification. As crazy as it might have seemed when the first R-rated film bundled its way into cinemas in 1984, work soon began on Police Academy, the animated series. A syndicated weekday afternoon kids series, with action figures and even a supporting Marvel comic now in the pipeline as well. Police Academy diversification was in action. Clearly, Warner Brothers were attempting to wring as much value out of the Police Academy IP as they possibly could. But even if that didn't prove successful, at least we still had the safety of the film series to fall back on. Right? Right? Hello? Police Academy 5, Assignment Miami Beach. Police Academy 5, Assignment Miami Beach. Police Academy 5, Assignment Miami Beach.
Shark! Help!
Police Academy 5.
Leave the swimming area now, mister!
It's the best in fun and guns under the sun.
This film is not good. Although this film is bad by any measure, it's also worth reflecting on the fact that the world was a very different place by 1988 to the one that Police Academy had entered 4 years earlier. The Wall Street crash of October 1987 had a profound effect on not just the bank balances, but the outlooks of much of the Western world. 80s excess was at its peak as the first Police Academy film emerged in 1984. But by the release of the 5th installment, the party was in some ways over.
Everybody! Party's over!
Whereas the highest grossing films of 1984 were the likes of Ghostbusters and Gremlins, in 1987 and 1988, it was movies like Rain Man and Fatal Attraction. All great films, but a considerable tonal shift. Even in terms of the hit comedies in cinemas, by 1987 it was Three Men and a Baby leading the pack. Steve Guttenberg himself was growing up on screen, but the Police Academy world he had left behind was not. In fact, by Police Academy 5, it was very much regressing. Even if there had been a consistent drop in quality across the film so far, for me, things really fall off a cliff here. It was written by Stephen Kerwick and directed by Alan Meyerson, who had both made their names in TV sitcoms. Meyerson was far more experienced than Kerwick, and he'd also directed a few films, including an entirely dodgy 1981 sex comedy called Private Lessons. Police Academy 5 was shot on location in Miami across an 8-week period between late September and November 1987. It seems like shooting the film would have been much more fun than actually watching it. The story involved Commandant Lassard somehow being chosen as Police Officer of the Decade, with the award due to be given to him in a ceremony at the Police Chiefs Convention in Miami. So Lassard and his remaining crew head off to Florida to attend. Meanwhile, Captain Harris realizes Lassard is due for mandatory retirement, and there is some chaos involving the most ridiculously overplayed jewel thieves in history, and that's about your lot in terms of plot points. Lassard, Harris, and Proctor carry the film from the police side of the equation. They're all naturally funny human beings, and it's actually great to have Lassard playing a substantial role, but the material they're being given here is largely not funny at all.
Then you're going to need better material.
Aside from structural issues, personnel was by this point becoming a problem as well. The established characters who did return are given very little to do apart from hang out on the beach and mess around with Captain Harris. The jokes at the expense of Tad Thacker's house character continue on from the previous edition, including one involving him being so fat that his changing seats on a commercial aeroplane is enough to dramatically tilt the whole thing to one side.
Excuse me, sir. Would you mind returning to your own seat? We're about to serve the meal.
The meal?
A gag which I found hilarious when I was 5. With Mahoney, Zed, Sweet Chuck, and others not there, much of the interest the Force has offered to the series is gone too. The Steve Guttenberg hole needed to be filled, of course, and the decision was made to replace him with Matt McCoy, an almost unknown actor who arrived as Commandant Lassard's nephew Eric. Now, I have nothing against Matt McCoy personally. He seems like he would be a nice man in real life, but as a knockoff Mahoney, it just doesn't work. Even if the Mahoney character started to get more annoying in the previous films, Steve Guttenberg was still the conscience of this bizarre franchise.
Oh, Captain Harris, hey, I didn't see you there. You know, I don't think we've been introduced. My name is Nick.
I don't care who you are, but what? Just get out of my sight.
The thing is, I feel like Police Academy 5 had some potential, with the new and different beachfront setting offering something new, and George Gaines playing such a central role. But the whole thing really was running out of steam by this point. Police Academy 5 was released on March 18th, 1988, to a chorus of boos from critical circles and a comparative lack of interest from audiences. Though the film did hit #1 on its debut week in cinemas, and doing that 5 years in a row is an achievement which shouldn't be dismissed, the revenue it was generating was down across the board compared to Part 4, let alone the first 3 Cash Bonanza installments. Once again, international revenue not only eclipsed domestic takings, but almost doubled it, and was really keeping the franchise afloat at this stage. With the film series starting to fall apart somewhat, Police Academy's attempts at diversifying their portfolio were proving to be a mixed bag at best. I have a very vague memory of watching the Police Academy cartoon as a kid, but I don't remember it hanging around my consciousness for too long. And it turns out, my foggy childhood memory was right. The animated series only lasted for 2 seasons. The animated show made its TV debut in September 1988 and inhabited a slightly different world to the increasingly wayward film series. This meant there were confusing irregularities, such as Mahoney still being the lead recruit of the cartoon world, despite the fact that Steve Guttenberg's character had already left Police Academy behind in the live-action world. Maybe there was a hope he would somehow return to the fold one day, who knows, but it still added a layer of messiness to the franchise as a whole. As for the action figures and comic, they were produced to cash in on what was hoped to be a big success for Warner Bros. Animation. The combination of the animated series and supporting toy line had proved particularly potent from a business perspective in the 1980s, and Police Academy was attempting to ride that wave all the way to the bank. Though this isn't my area of expertise, from researching those who do know about these things, it seems like the toys, first released in 1989, are looked back on as more of a strange curiosity than anything particularly memorable, and the Police Academy comics, which also debuted in 1989, only lasted for 6 editions, which I guess tells its own story in itself. Anyway. Amid dwindling success levels for external projects, the original film franchise was still stumbling on as well, just about. The final part of Police Academy's roller coaster 80s cinema journey was already on the production line. There was an element of going back to the drawing board for Police Academy 6, City Under Siege. Rather than on location in Miami, the production was housed in Los Angeles, within close proximity to the Warner execs, who had to have been concerned by the drop in takings and buzz achieved by Part 5. The film was set once again back in the unnamed city precinct of earlier stories, and Bruce Marler is back as Fackler for the first time since Police Academy 3. Feels like we're on more solid, nostalgic ground than we have been. Steve Guttenberg wasn't around, of course, but maybe a more back-to-basics approach could get things back on track. There were a few potentially glaring issues, however, as Police Academy 6, City Under Siege, began production in late October 1988. Stephen Kerwick, who had churned out the script for Part 5, was back on board. The brilliantly named Peter Boners, yes, Peter Boners, arrived as yet another new director, having been more known for his comedic acting career than his unspectacular resume behind the camera. Paul Maslansky had even wanted to take the film to Russia under the title Police Academy 6, Operation Glasnost, a feat he would need to wait until the next decade to achieve, after permission to film in the USSR was not granted. The film Maslansky was able to make involves part of the city becoming victim to a series of heists being carried out by a new gang of thugs, with Harrison Proctor unable to crack the case. The mayor brings in Lassard and the rest of the Police Academy crew, or at least those who have made it this far in the series, to help them solve it. So there is an element of focus here, and the characters have something to do. The story is fairly coherent, and dare I say it, almost logical. Police Academy 6 is also funnier than Part 5, which again, isn't really saying much. Lassard and Fackler causing carnage at a pool hall full of criminals is decent stuff. And Michael Winslow's impression of Jimi Hendrix is legitimately incredible. This is not a great film, sure, with large parts of the comedy being extremely lame, and the female characters don't get much to do. But it flies by at a decent pace, and there is a twist towards the end. If it doesn't feel like they've been trying much for the last couple of years, I think maybe there is some effort here, which is something at least. Critics, of course, despise the thing, with the Los Angeles Times review stating that City Under Siege was literally the work of the devil, should have been called Police Academy 666, and featured comedy so insidious it could scarcely be less than diabolically inspired. To know these 84 minutes is to know an endless living death.
And 2 more downturned thumbs for Police Academy 6, City Under Siege. The amazing series continues, amazing because neither one of us find it very funny.
I don't know though, this film is patently ridiculous, and is not good enough to be called a return to form. That ship had long sailed by this stage. I do, however, distinctly remember Police Academy 6 being a VHS favourite of mine as a kid, and I did not hate it 35 years later either. Who knows what that says about me, as the general consensus seems to be that this is a new low for the brand. The reality of the situation the franchise found itself in by 1989 was that the damage was already well and truly done. Goodwill had been washed away by years of rushed sequels and creative changes, and City Under Siege would have needed to be a masterpiece to claw back lost momentum. As much as I enjoyed elements of this one more than I thought I might, I definitely can't claim Police Academy 6 to be a masterpiece. Box office performance reflected the malaise the once powerful series found itself in. For the first time in 6 years, a Police Academy film did not make a spring debut as the #1 film in North America, with City Under Siege having to settle for second spot. Both domestic and international business, along with that of home video, TV, and essentially any other metric, were noticeably lower than any of the 5 films that came before it. The seemingly endless run was finally coming to an end. They'd had very little juice creatively for a while already, but they were now no longer able to justify their existence, thanks to revenue generation either. By the end of the decade, it must have been a strange feeling for Paul Maslansky that there were no plans for another film after 6 solid years of producing these things. With the animated series cancelled as well, the future of what had been an unexpected financial juggernaut for Warner Brothers was entirely unclear, if it had one at all. Next time, in the final part of No Laughing Matter, The dawn of a new decade brings with it an uncertain future for Police Academy. Plus there's unlikely attempts at international diplomacy, ill-fated ventures into yet more new mediums, and the franchise's cast and crew experiencing life beyond the Police Academy bubble. As we enter the rapidly changing cultural landscape of the 1990s, is Police Academy an outdated relic of a bygone era, living on borrowed time, or does the crumbling empire still have something left to offer? Was the decision to take the series to Russia as crazily misguided as it sounds? And what legacy does Police Academy leave in its wake? All that and more as we complete the journey of No Laughing Matter, the deepest Police Academy franchise dive you are ever likely to see, courtesy of your friendly neighbourhood culture slice.